You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders ready to increase their club's revenue. The time for change begins right now. Creating and sustaining a foundation for ongoing financial success at your club is not easy to do. If it was, you'd be doing it. In this episode, Rick Coyne, the founder of PCMA and the CEO of Clubmark, is with us to share his perspective on how to create a roadmap to financial sustainability. If you're struggling to create a positive, lasting change at your club, this podcast is for you. Rick Coyne is about as close to the private club industry as you can get as the head of the Professional Club Marketers Association, or as you may know it, the PCMA, and he's also the CEO of Clubmark Corporation. So when it comes to some of the challenges clubs face in building sustainable financial success, he's seen it all, and so I'm glad to have him here today. Rick, how you doing today?
I'm so good, Ed, I need a twin.
I love that one. The other one I really love is I asked some guy one time, I said, how you doing? He said, terrific, but the good news is I'm getting better. So I like yours. I got to remember yours.
I like them both.
Thanks so much for being with us today. And boy, it's I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And you're so closely linked to the club world and private clubs as the co-founder of the PCMA and CEO of Clubmark. You are about as close as someone can get to having a pulse on the private club industry. So we hear clubs talking about raising initiation fees, and a lot of times people will go, wow, the private club industry is really on its way back, or it must be doing great. But in conversations we have, that may not be the case. So I ask you right off the bat, how would you summarize the state of private clubs in the U.S.?
Well, I think the club industry has gone through three specific life cycles over the past 100 years. And essentially what's happened over the past, 2.5, 3 decades in the club industry is we have seen a meteoric growth of clubs. That initial growth spurted initiation fees that rose exponentially, in some cases not even related to their market, just simply because they could, because the participation, the number of golfers was increasing exponentially as well. What has happened over time is that in many markets we became overbuilt, and a correction naturally then begins to take place. Starting in about 2003, we started to see a closure rate of clubs that was at an alarming rate. I think what we're beginning to see now after the debacle of 2008 and the financial meltdown is that clubs are finally beginning to take a harder look at strategy. I mean, at the end of the day, vision without action is a daydream, and action without vision is a nightmare. And I think we've lived in a nightmare for a number of years within this industry, and now you're seeing some visionary folks emerge in the industry that are beginning to understand what it really takes to be successful in the club industry. I mean, at the end of the day, if we are not relevant to the people that we are trying to attract or whom we have as our existing members, we will cease to exist. Relevance is the key. And, the reverse of that increase of initiation fees back in the 80s came back to us in spades in recent years, where clubs are now diminishing those initiation fees, sub down to zero, which is a disaster because there's no capitalization. So I would say, in my opinion of the industry, is it's coming back. We've had a correction. We'll probably continue to see a bit of a correction. And those clubs that begin to recognize how to develop their programming internally to meet the needs of not only their existing members, but also to be attracted to that next generation of members are going to be fine.
So, in that spirit, as the private club industry is making its comeback and things are getting healthier. It seems to me in conversations that you and I have had as well that while that may be the case, you really can't continue to operate, or you being meaning the clubs. But if you're a club operator, club manager, general manager, or even director of sales and marketing, you can't really operate the way you did 15, 20 years ago. Is that safe to say? From a sales and marketing perspective, let me at least put it that way.
Yeah, no, I think at the end of the day, Ed, it just boils down to, look, we exist as a club by our ability to grow our membership, at least in pace with the number of members that are leaving, that we hold our attrition rates to a reasonable level. We engage our members to use the club, and we're creating ambassadors of those people that they'll bring their friends and guests to come in and potentially become members as well. If we're not doing that, and I think when growth is really high and we're, feeding off of the high tide, everything is great. But ultimately, success depends upon what we put into the process.
All right. Speaking of process, so in your consulting work with clubs, you have successfully identified some of the challenges that clubs have in gaining traction for their marketing initiatives and in creating really a pathway to success. To the extent that you've created an 8-step model that is the roadmap to sustainability for private clubs, and which I think I'd love to walk through if you're open to that, because in the first step in the model is diagnostic and discovery, and we've had conversations around the need for clubs to do their due diligence. Tell us what you see in this, in this model, and then in this first step as well.
Sure. It doesn't matter if you're a legitimate consulting company, if you're legitimate about trying to understand a particular business. There's absolutely no question that you have to do due diligence first. It doesn't really matter what the consulting firm, they will tell you that they do 4 things. We do due diligence, concept design, we do a implementation stage, and then we do maintenance. And so to that end, what we developed over some years was kind of, as you called it, the roadmap to sustainability. And it does begin with diagnostic and discovery. And we believe that there's at least 5 pieces to that. One is understanding how members are using their club. We want to know age statistics of our members. We want to know the demographic of the member that has joined over the past 5 years. And there's reasons for all of this, and I'll get into some of it. But secondly, we want to look at the market demographics of a club. And this is critical. The market for a club is finite and predictable. And so if, for example, 70% of your members are over the age of 65, but the market that you serve, a 15 or 20-minute drive time, has 70% of the market that's under 65, you got a problem. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about demographics is that if you ask anybody in a club, particularly board members, about their marketplace, everybody will espouse that they know about the marketplace. But it's not about just what you inherently know. It's about the metrics of that market that really matter, being able to dig into it and drive things like your pricing philosophy. How do you set pricing if you don't know how many people in your marketplace can afford it? When we look at demographics, we want to know what the interests of people are. We can look at your marketplace and say, okay, how many people can afford it? Well, that now makes a finite number. But even more importantly, if you're a golf club and that's really what you're going after, you have to look at the number of golfers in that market that can afford it. Mm-hmm. And today we're looking at about a 15% golf participation rate. And if you looked at a club that had a $50,000 initiation fee and $800 a month dues, you're probably talking about a $200,000 annual income. Well, you're down to about 3% of the population when you get into that. So it's important that we understand all of these things. Of course, then you want to build brand significance to to the membership and to the non-member community. You want to do surveys. You want to know what your members are thinking, what they want. And it's not just about getting their opinion on what should we build next. It's not just an opinion on how they feel about the food and beverage service. You want to make a member survey into a management tool that will allow you to program internally within your club that's going to build that ambassador of goodwill that's going to be out there perpetuating the membership process by bringing in the people that they want to see sitting at the table next to them in the dining room.
So in many ways, what you're saying, it's like building a lookalike audience in that way using surveys. And the other part is that it's more than, I mean, while you talk about knowing the population and disposable income and stuff like that, there's so much more to really break down in that market demographic analysis part of this phase.
Absolutely. So if I know, for example, just to give you one example as to how we take the metrics of diagnostics and make it work. So I will go into a club and say, all right, I want to look at the members that have joined your club over the past 5 years. What's their age demographic? What do their kids look like? And I'll overlay that on top of what the overall 15, 20-minute drive time market looks like. And if we're seeing disparity in terms of we're not attracting equally into the club as the whole market itself indicates we should, then obviously something is going on internally to tell us that we're not attracting that group, we're not relevant to that group. But if I know who's joining over the past 5 years and everything seems to be working fine, we're getting a percentage of the market in that we should be, then what I'm going to do is to do this member survey, ask questions, and look to see how that person who's been a member for less than 5 years has responded. So if they're telling me on a scale of 1 to 5, they joined the club for these reasons, and one of my opportunities from this survey is to continue to grow my membership, what I'm going to see is how best to go after the same market that's been my market for the past 5 years. And so the metrics of these, when you combine all of these things, you really get into something that is amazing. We also, the final thing we do is a competitive strategy analysis. And rather than just look at the traditional, what do they charge, where are they, how do we subjectively think about them in comparison to us, we really take about a 7-point scale and say, okay, from location to golf facilities to spa facilities to restaurant facilities to ambiance to all these things. And we do a 5-point scale rating ourselves and the competitive clubs in the market area. And quite literally, if you just took that in a very objective way and did these things, you'd have the makings of a strategic plan. You'd find out where your failures are, and you'd find out where your pluses are.
That's terrific. And just so you know, Rick, we'll have the model. We'll have the graphic on the website as well, that will accompany a blog that explains more. So as we go through stuff, if you want to reference what people will see, that they'll have that connection as well. So if you're listening and you're wondering, you don't have the blog in front of you, it will be posted with the link below. So that's diagnostic and discovery, right? So once you go through this part of the sustainability process, we have an understanding of where we sit and kind of like what you're saying, you'll know where you are and have the reality of your situation. Is that right?
Absolutely. So, and quite frankly, the first piece of it is for us to completely understand your business before we can sit down with you and kind of work with you on developing that next phase. So whether this was me doing this or this was a club manager doing this, the validity is still there. One of the other things that diagnostics does for you is it allows you to come in and take people of diverse opinions and narrow their scope of thinking by virtue of the reality of data. And so when you take this data out now to management and volunteer leadership and to department heads, and you talk about this and say, all right, now what does this mean to us as a club? So if women are making 85% of the decisions today, is it important that we say hi to the woman when she walks into the pro shop? And the answer is,
Pretty
of course
important.
it is.
Yeah,
but
right.
sometimes that doesn't happen. And so, and again, I think the things that we've found, when you get education on multiple levels within the club, from volunteer leadership to department heads, what you've got is cohesive thinking. You've got vision that evolves from that. But when you have the golf pro goes to his educational program, the club manager goes to his program, and the membership director goes to her program, and the board really doesn't have an educational base to go to, then what you have is diversity and silos and biases, and that's what you want to try to avoid when you're developing strategy. So that allows us, that synthesis and collaborative discussion allows us to drill down into a pretty narrow gap of things that should follow next into concept design.
Yeah. So so people who are listening, those are the first two stages, really, as you outline, are that diagnostic and discovery, and then the synthesis and discussion around that as well, which is so important. And now moving to the concept design, conversion to concept design.
Yeah. So, and again, we would typically, having worked with over 1,000 clubs, we would typically have some inkling at this point in time where we would like to drive the club. But again, if this was a GM doing this on his own, he is at this point able to say, okay, where are we from a market positioning standpoint? Who are we attractive to? Who are we not attractive to? Are the kinds of programs that we are running relevant to the female, relevant to the family, or relevant to that next generation of members that we need to bring in? It's interesting because the thing we sometimes forget in the club industry is that we serve two communities. Certainly we serve our members, and that's how and why we exist. But if we're not continually trying to find ways to be attractive to that next generation of member, then sooner or later that train is going to get to the station and stop. And so we have to, part of this market positioning idea is remaining relevant, finding ways to remain relevant. Facilities are the other piece. If we do a survey in the process of the due diligence and we just look at a composite of that survey, chances are, if your average age in your club is 65 years old, the pool isn't going to show up as being really an important factor, or children's activities may not be a terribly important factor. But when you look at that younger family, that family that we're trying to track, those things become very important to them. So the facilities piece, I think we've learned a lot about. We look at the things today that are most monetizable when a club spends money on capital improvements. We're not going to make any more money on putting new bunkers in. We are going to make more money when we put casual outside dining. We are going to make money and create more usage when we put a Cheers type bar into a club. We are going to make more money. We're going to get more engagement, and we're going to get more happy members when we build cabanas and make the pool more adult, as much adult as it is for kids. And we do the same thing all the way across from bocce ball. We have leagues around the country today that are 400, 500 members strong. And so the conversion, when we get into this to concept design, is taking the relevance of the activities, the relevance of the facilities, and incorporating that into a plan that goes forward from there.
So, Rick, before we move on to how people, how to get approval for these things, I just wanted to point out one thing and get your thoughts on it briefly. But it seems like there are a lot of clubs who go right to this concept design phase because someone has an idea, or in a privately owned club, the owner has this idea that, hey, we should do this, and they haven't done the due diligence. They haven't done the diagnostic and discovery. They haven't talked to people about it. It's like the decision's made in a vacuum. And they might go, gosh, it didn't work. But do you see that frequently where people are, where decisions are made like, hey, we need a cheers type bar for the golfers after their round, but there's no indication that says that that's really what's most needed?
Oh yeah, you see it. I mean, you see it less today, I think, than in the past, where we could literally throw something against the wall and see if it stuck. But the conditions today, where we have been overbuilt, we've seen a decline in the number of golfers, particularly, but in memberships in general. And I think what we today have to look at, and just think for a second, Ed, about the conditions in today's lifestyle. Time is a commodity that is
scarce.
Become so scarce, and so right, exactly. And so what we're seeing is the number of golf rounds declining, but is the interest in golf declining? And my perception is no. So along comes an entertainment company, and I stress entertainment company in Topgolf, that comes out and says, we're going to build this monumental driving facility, but we're going to put lots of lights out there. There's going to be music. We're going to serve you food. We're going to serve you alcohol. You don't have to be a player. We're going to make it computerized, and we're going to make it fun. So in an hour and a half or 2 hours, you can be in and out of there. You've had a ball. You've had some drinks. You've been with friends, and you walk away from there saying, I'm going to do that again.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we wrote in a recent white paper relative to driving this kind of thinking forward is you have to look out there and say, what are the conditions today that demand that we do what differently? And it's pretty simple. If it's a woman that you're trying to attract as a member, if it's a younger family that you're trying to attract as a member, if your golf rounds are going down and you're losing members because the wife is saying, well, you only played once last month and it's costing us $800 for that round, then find ways to get him out there for an hour and a half in the afternoons on the driving range and make it fun.
Right.
So there's the due diligence is also about, and I'm glad you brought that up. The due diligence is also about understanding the nature of the industry and the nature of the cultural changes that have taken place in our lifetime.
Yeah, terrific. Let's talk about getting buy-in, the consensus and approval process.
Yeah, and I think once you've had collaborative discussion, getting to consensus is a lot easier than having not had the due diligence, obviously. So the board and committee needs, in my opinion, to be an absolute alignment with the vision and going forward. It has to be a top-down exercise. It's a ground-up delivery, but it's a top-down exercise in saying this is what we endorse, this is our philosophy, this is our mission, this is our vision, and this is the way we're going forward from today on. And then, of course, in any kind of strategy, there has to be a tactical piece of the implementation. So you can't do any of this in a vacuum. It has to involve the team. You have to be acutely aware of what they have to say and how they see the club. We do culture surveys of our staff to find out kind of how they're feeling about is the club inclusive to them or exclusive to them. Clubs that are inclusive find that the experience to the membership is far better than those that kind of hold the line staff as an example at arm's length. So converting this concept is really about getting everybody on board. And sometimes if it's radically different than what the club has done in the past, this really takes also getting to the members and explaining to them why you're doing what you're doing. And again, if you're introducing data along that path, you'll find that 90% of the people in a town hall meeting, as an example, will say, hey, I completely understand it. And of course, we all know that there's 10% of members in every club USA that aren't going to buy into anything you do. So you start with that in the back of your mind and you won't be disappointed.
Yeah. But you really do need that alignment, strong leadership, alignment around values, and to create a culture that everyone lives and breathes, from the board to all the members and the entire staff. It's hard to do, though, isn't it? It's hard to pull that off, because if you try to implement, which is coming up next, if you try to implement and you're fragmented, good luck.
Absolutely. And part of the problem in the club industry in general is that we have probably the greatest brain trust we have in our clubs is our board. However, if they're not brought along properly, it's kind of like a Will Rogers statement that he once said, there's nothing quite so stupid as an educated man once you remove him from his field of education. What we need to do is to find a uniformity and a consistency that once you've developed a strategy or a vision for where the club needs to head, that there is a system in place to where every new board member is oriented into whatever that strategic plan, that strategy happens to be, and that each year or even every 6 months, the club sits down and monitors, where have we gone? How far have we come in this thing? So in our strategies, what we do is develop the first column of maybe 5 or 4 major goals and objectives. The second column is usually going to be the strategic actions required of the board in order to take it and give it over to the third column, which is the tactical implementation piece, and that's staff. And if you sit down every 6 months or so, or have a board retreat once a year and go through all of this, holding people accountable to timelines and to tasks, you'll find that, what you're building is consistency and accountability, and everybody kind of begins to understand how to make this flow better. And little by little, you see this club emerging as very successful. So that leads us into the implementation, and that's where I say that the staff is all important. They're the deliverable within our club. They're the deliverable of the philosophy or the action plan that we've just created. Dick Copland, a good friend of mine, says that, and I think I'm maybe quoting this properly, but he indicates that a member is touched 28 times every time they come into the club. Well, that's 28 moments of truth. And it isn't 28 contacts with the GM. It isn't 28 contacts with the department heads. It's 28 contacts typically with line staff people. And the more that we can bring them through and align them into this process, giving them praise for the things that they're doing properly and keeping it on track, the better the program is going to be for everybody. So
I was just going to go ahead.
No, in the end, well, I was just going to say, in many cases, this is realigning a club to recognize that for many years, as an example, we've labored under. When you mention marketing in a club, people would be like, "Oh my God, marketing! We're a private club." No, we market, we sell. That's what we do. It's what we do each and every day. We're selling, we're marketing. And you can't just sit there and say, well, it's just going to take care of itself because we're a private club. We have to bring communications into this. We have to bring a strategy to our communications. At the end of the day, the strategy boils down to how well you communicate it, and that's to the staff, to the club members, and also inadvertently we are sending messages out to the non-member community as well.
Yeah. So as you look at the model, from consensus and approval to implementation to where we're talking right now, which is a communication strategy, which is how are we going to actually roll this out, right? And let's make sure we're all uniform. I mean, those three areas, that's a critical, I mean, they're all important, but this is a really critical part of the process, because I was just thinking about implementation and how often in various organizations, not even in private clubs, where management has an idea and it's like the flavor of the month. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, we've been through this, and I know what this looks like. We'll see how long this one lasts. But to get that buy-in around the alignment and really reinforce it and then roll it out the right way is so important, isn't it?
A lot. You said a key word, alignment, and quite often when you're bringing something new and visionary to an environment, to a club, you will find that there are those that just look at that and give the same response that you just said. Oh, we've tried that before. That won't work, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, in order to drive forward, sometimes it means leaving some people in the dust. And if somebody can't grasp onto the new mission, the new vision that you have for the club, regardless of whether or not they've been there for 20 years, if they can't seem to come along and be part of a team that's going to be harmonious and congruent and consistent, then really what they need to do is to go. And what I've found over the years, Ed, is that you don't have to get rid of those people. If you force the mission and the vision on people and keep reminding them that they're not fulfilling that mission or the vision, they'll leave on their own.
Yeah, no one wants to fail.
Realize they can't do it.
Yeah.
It's
that's like
exactly right.
Jim Collins in his book Good to Great. It's, get the right people in the right seat, and a lot of times, like you said, if people it just doesn't work for them anymore, they will choose to leave, which is even better. So you don't have to have those difficult conversations if you don't like those. We've got a couple steps left in the process, in the next around governance, alignment, and continuity.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you just brought up Jim Collins, because I'm a fan and read a lot of Jim Collins, and How the Mighty Fall was actually one of my favorites. And it really aligns to this whole discussion that we're having today, because he essentially says when you cease to be relevant to the market that you serve, you will no longer exist. And he said you can watch companies, and I don't know if you've read the book, Ed, but you can watch companies go through a 5-step process, and eventually they succumb to irrelevance and death. And so I think we've seen a reversal of that in the club industry, going back to our original conversation. We've seen that many clubs are beginning to see that we need to have a new vision. We need to align with what the community is saying they want from us as members. We need to give them the activities and the events. We need to give them the facilities that they need in order to use the club more frequently, to engage and to enjoy and to become ambassadors. So, yeah, Jim Collins is a great author, great business author, and I recommend that. And we bring that up in our annual board retreats. We have recommended reading. Blue Ocean Strategy is one of them. Jim Collins, How the Mighty Fall, but it is important for alignment and continuity that you do have some system of annually updating, and it's not just enough to bring in board members and give them an orientation of what it takes to be a board member. You really have to bring them into speed with all of the strategy and action plans that are in place, so that they don't come in, and I've seen this happen all too often, that an incoming board will we'll look 3 new guys every year, 3 folks every year, men or women, and they don't know quite exactly what has been going on at the club. They've perceived things, and so their natural tendency then when they come in is to fill a perceived void that they have in their mind. And of course, obviously, that is just the wrong way to go about this. One of the things that we see in governance today that works extraordinarily well is having a responsibility matrix that says, here's what the board's role is, here's what the committee's role is, here's what the GM's role is, here's what the department head role is, here's what the line staff role is. And so that you try to keep people in the place that they're supposed to be, in the board's case, philosophical, and in the committee, suggestive, in the GM, operations, and so on and so on. So it is important that these that the boards recognize that in order to make governance work, they have to have their own set of consistency. They have to have their own set of accountability. But it's important that they retain the vision. And if you don't have a consistent way of doing that, for example, our strategic plans are 1 page. You'll have a volume of information behind it, but that 1 page shows those 4 or 5 goals, the strategic actions required, and the implementation phase, and the mission and vision is on the other side. That becomes all important to have at every single board meeting, every single committee meeting, so that everybody is constantly aware of this is what we're doing. And so if somebody brings a new idea to the table, which they should, and should be encouraged to do so, they have to remain within the confines of whatever that strategy says they have to do. And that brings you to the maintenance of the process. And what you're going to do, what clubs find in going through this wheel that we've created, is that along the way, they're going to find some really cool best practices. But we learn so much when you have an open-minded, collaborative discussion of things, and you bring people through this process, that the best practices will emerge. And so every year you're taking what you've learned and you're reevaluating how that can be set into motion as a part of the next level of strategy. So each year that strategy is going to be reconstructed. You're going to look at it to see what might have changed from a demographic perspective, from an economy perspective, and you'll drive it forward. But you're continuing in this wheel. So this wheel is 360 degrees, but it's also perpetual. So you're constantly going through this. And I think at the end of the day, clubs that will really take the time to go through this will be successful, not only today, but they're going to build a sustainability that few clubs have been able to do, except in really remarkable markets over the last 10 or 20 years.
It's a terrific model. And, you know, what I find so interesting, too, about it is well, first there's this whole idea of understanding and assessing where you are, and then getting buy-in along the way, and then making sure that you have the right people, as Jim Collins would say, the right people on the bus. And then, you know, one of the things around the alignment and the governance alignment and continuity is that there's so much data that's available to us today. We had one of our guests actually last week was Robert Coulard, who is the Director of Sales and Marketing for Columbine Country Club. And the data that he has, he's able to present to board members, not even just in meetings, but if someone has a question or if a board member challenges him by, you know, just stopping in the office, the information that he has available is remarkable because so much data is available. And that's one of the things you have as well. And then just making sure that people stay connected with the vision and where you're going. I think that idea that you've presented of making sure that you have that strategic document in every meeting, just so that people, because we all get wayward in conversations, but boy, can that keep you focused if it's always front and center.
Well, and something else you just said, Ed, that is also the uniqueness of this is that you're using data to drive this process. It isn't my thinking. This is data combined with what we know of what's happening in the world today, combined with what we know from the member surveys about what we know of our members and the incoming new members. And we're able to take that through collaborative discussions and drive facilitation of a plan. And when you get a team moving in that direction and holding all of the stakeholders accountable to that consistent and objective facilitation, what you're going to have is a club that, people are going to stand back and say, I want to bring my friends to that club. And again, what it boils down to is I want to create satisfaction and engagement. If we're not doing that, we're not growing. And so in order to get there, we have to, one of my favorite board presidents of all time was a guy from Minnesota, and he said, as we walked into the first strategic planning session, he said to all of the guys that had assembled, or the folks that had assembled in that room, he said, there's only one thing that I will ask of each of you, and I appreciate you being here, but leave your personal biases and agendas at the door. We're here for our club, not for us as individuals. And I think that to me is a key piece of strategy. If you can get the right people to think that way and to move it forward, your club's going to do so much better because of it.
That's terrific. This is the way it's presented, the way it's thoughtfully connected as well, Rick, is super valuable. And it makes so much sense in your work. What is the biggest objection to implementing this model or this type of thinking? What do you think? And whether it's yours or whether it's someone else, I mean, what do you think is the biggest obstacle that gets in the way of clubs from being able to really thoughtfully put a plan or a process like this together?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily anyone on a staff, and I don't mean that in any negative sense. I don't think there's anyone necessarily on a staff that can take and put all of these pieces together on top of what they have as a day-to-day life of work and getting things done in their own respective areas. So whether that's the GM, the assistant, department head, it's just this is a difficult process. So I think time is a problem. I think interpretation. I mean, you'd almost have to have an education in some respects in the whole marketing side of the world as we see it today in order to be able to interpret even some of this data. So a lot of people will take the data, they get to the data phase, but then they don't know quite what it's telling them. And so a misinterpretation takes place and you're off in the wrong direction. So I guess in a word, it's time, Ed, that is probably the largest pushback. We have ways in which we can put almost all this information together very simply, very quickly for a club. They can take it on their own. We'll work with them interpreting it, or we'll get involved with a club on a full strategic planning basis and take them through a 60, 90, 120-day process to get a strategic plan built. But by and large, what I found is the clubs that get out there and try to do this by themselves, and there's a lot of good firms out there that do strategy work today. But the clubs that get out there and do it on their own, it unfortunately finds its way to a shelf and seldom sees the light of day. And I think that's a shame when you don't have this kind of wheel that we've been talking about here today to drive everybody in a consistent fashion.
Well, Rick, we really appreciate your time and your wisdom, and it's been terrific for us, and hopefully for you who are listening at home. And so, thanks so much for joining us on Crushing Club Marketing today.
Thank you, Ed. I look forward to listening to myself when I get a chance to hear this.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ed.
And thank you for listening. Next week, we're going to get into crisis communication. If an unexpected emergency came up at your club, are you equipped to manage the communication of that event? Not just with your members, but with the digital world around us. We've got Andy Skugman, a crisis communication expert, with us next week to help us plan and prepare. Until then, keep crushing your club marketing.